Across the world, millions place their faith in religious leaders. Men trusted to guide, protect, and represent something greater than themselves. But behind the cameras, behind the pulpits, and behind the carefully crafted images, some of these leaders were hiding secrets darker than anyone imagined. This documentary explores 10 powerful pastors whose names once inspired hope, but whose actions left behind shock, betrayal, and wounds that still haven't healed. From miracle healers exposed as frauds, to prosperity preachers drowning in luxury, to spiritual icons brought down by scandals that stunned entire nations. These are the stories of men who claim to speak for God while serving something very different. Each case is a journey into ambition, temptation, abuse, and unchecked power. And each one forces us to ask, when a preacher falls, how many people fall with him? Welcome to 10 Pastors Who Betrayed Their Followers. A story of faith, money, corruption, and the human cost of placing trust in the wrong hands.
Peter Popoff. There are stories about deception. And then there's Peter Popoff, a man who convinced thousands that God whispered secrets into his ears, when in reality, it was coming from a radio signal backstage. His rise was built on desperate believers. His exposure became one of the most shocking takedowns in the history of televangelism, and his comeback, even stranger. Born into the pulpit. Peter Popoff's story begins in Germany before his family moved to California. His father was a traveling preacher, fiery, charismatic, a man who believed emotional spectacle was central to faith. Popoff absorbed all of it. As a teenager, he wasn't just attending revival meetings. He was memorizing how to control a room. By his 20s, Popoff was hosting his own services, loud, electric, overflowing with promises of financial blessings and divine healing. And people believed every word. Miracle Man. By the early 1980s, Popoff had become a star. His services weren't sermons, they were performances. He called out names, illnesses, addresses, seemingly at random. Imagine sitting in a crowd of thousands and suddenly hearing your name and disease shouted from the stage. That moment of shock, that belief that God himself had seen you. That's what Popoff built his empire on. To audiences, it looked supernatural. To desperate families battling cancer, debt, or chronic pain, it looked like hope. Just one prayer away from a miracle. But behind that curtain, something else was happening. The skeptic who broke the spell. While Popoff's fame grew, so did suspicion. One man wasn't buying it. James Randi, a magician and professional skeptic known for exposing frauds. Randi wondered, how is Popoff able to know so much, so quickly, about total strangers? Then came a discovery that changed everything. Investigators attended a Popoff crusade with a radio scanner. They swept through frequencies and then...
She has cancer. Her name is Mary. She's in Section B, Row 4.
It wasn't God. It was his wife, Elizabeth Popoff, feeding him details from prayer cards filled out before the show. Popoff wasn't a prophet. He was a performer with an earpiece. The entire miracle routine, every revelation, every dramatic gasp from the crowd, all of it was orchestrated. The voice of God was a radio transmission. The national exposure. In 1986, Randi brought the evidence to The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Millions watched as Popoff's deception was played publicly through audio recordings.
Hello, Petey. She's got a tumor on her left breast.
The illusion shattered. Popoff's ministry collapsed within months. Donations dried up. Lawsuits piled in. And in 1987, he declared bankruptcy. It looked like the end. But with Peter Popoff, nothing is ever that simple. The resurrection. Most frauds exposed on national television never return. Peter Popoff did, and he came back with something new. Miracle Spring Water. A free packet mailed to your home. Blessed, sacred, and, according to Popoff, capable of releasing money into your life. Debt erased. Bills paid. Unexpected checks arriving. But in exchange, he encouraged a seed offering, urging viewers to donate more and more. Reporters tested the water. It was ordinary tap water. But Popoff wasn't selling water. He was selling hope. And hope pays well. In the 2000s, Popoff was earning tens of millions per year. Late-night TV slots, endless advertisements, a new audience unfamiliar with his past. The scandal faded from memory, but Popoff didn't. The modern controversy. Multiple investigations found that Popoff's letters used psychological profiling, telling recipients exactly what they wanted to hear based on their earlier responses. Some got messages promising money. Others received letters claiming spiritual attacks were coming unless they sent another offering. Critics argue it preys on the poor, families expecting healing, seniors living on fixed incomes, people drowning in debt, hoping for supernatural relief. Yet Popoff remains legally protected, because giving money to a ministry is voluntary, and voluntary suffering is still suffering. Why Popoff still thrives. Many wonder, how does a man caught so publicly still operate today? The answer is simple. Desperation doesn't disappear just because deception has been exposed. When someone is sick, broke, or broken, they'll cling to anything that promises relief. Even if the promise comes from a man whose lies were once broadcast on national television. And Popoff knows this. He built a career on it. Twice. Result. Peter Popoff isn't just a preacher who fell from grace. He's the reminder that when miracles are for sale, the truth is always the highest price. Jim Bakker. Before the scandals, before the headlines, before the collapse. Jim Bakker ruled Christian television. He built an empire of theme parks, hotels, and a global audience, funded almost entirely by believers who thought their donations were building God's kingdom. But behind the glittering lights and polished smiles, something darker was taking shape. This is the rise and ruin of Jim Bakker, the origin of a showman. Jim Bakker didn't start out as a televangelist celebrity. He began with puppets, literally. In the 1960s, Jim and Tammy Faye traveled the country performing Christian puppet shows for kids. It was small, humble, and it worked. Producers noticed their charisma, their emotional appeal, their ability to make audiences feel something. Soon, the couple was on national Christian television, not as guests, but as the future. Jim wasn't just preaching, he was performing, and America was watching. The birth of a television kingdom. By the 1970s, Jim Bakker launched PTL, Praise the Lord, and the format was groundbreaking. Part talk show, part church service, part variety hour. A Christian version of The Tonight Show. Audiences devoured it. PTL exploded into one of the largest Christian broadcasts in the world, reaching nearly 20 million Americans weekly. Money poured in. Not just donations, hopes, prayers, and entire life savings mailed to the PTL studios. and Bakker promised blessings in return. For many, PTL felt like church, family, and entertainment all in one. But Jim Bakker had higher ambitions, much higher. Heritage USA, the Christian Disneyland. Imagine Disneyland, but built for evangelical Christians. That's what Jim Bakker created in South Carolina. Heritage USA. A 2,500-acre Christian theme park complete with hotels, rides, a water park, condos, and conference centers. It became the third most visited theme park in America. To believers, it felt like heaven on earth. To Jim Bakker, it was proof he was chosen by God to reshape American Christianity. But behind the pastel-colored buildings and smiling families, cracks were already forming. Big ones. The money problem they tried to bury. Heritage USA cost more than donations could sustain. Jim Bakker had built something massive and massively expensive. So he created lifetime partnerships, a donation that guaranteed donors free annual stays at the Heritage Hotels. A good idea, in theory. Except Bakker oversold them. Badly. He sold tens of thousands more hotel partnerships than there were rooms to accommodate. People thought they were buying holy real estate. But what they really bought was a slot in an impossible roster. It was a financial time bomb ticking in Jim Bakker's hands. The scandal that broke the empire. In 1987, the scandal hit. A young church secretary, Jessica Hahn, came forward with shocking allegations about Bakker. Accusations of manipulation, coercion, a secret payment, a cover-up. The media storm was nuclear. For many believers who once cried with Bakker on live TV, this was unthinkable. But the sexual scandal was only the beginning. Investigators digging deeper found financial chaos, fraudulent partnerships, misused donations, extravagant spending on luxury homes and cars. The ministry that preached humility was drowning in greed. The courtroom fall. Jim Bakker's trial became national theater. Prosecutors argued he deceived followers out of more than $150 million. Jurors heard stories of donated money used for vacations, clothes, and perks. And the verdict? Guilty. 24 counts. Bakker was sentenced to 45 years in prison. The man who once claimed God as his financial advisor now answered to federal law. Tammy Faye left. PTL collapsed. Heritage USA shut its gates. The empire built on promises had turned into a monument of betrayal. Release, reinvention, and apocalypse. After appeals, Bakker served about 5 years. And when he returned to TV, he didn't come back with prosperity messages. He came back with fear. Jim Bakker reinvented himself as an end-times prophet, selling survival food buckets, apocalypse kits, and last-day supplies. No more Christian Disneyland. Now it was doomsday prepping. Critics argued he was exploiting fear for profit all over again. But his new audience, smaller but fiercely loyal, kept sending money.
The legacy of Jim Bakker. Jim Bakker's story is a story of ambition, theatrical charisma, and a spectacular collapse. To some, he's a redeemed man who paid for his mistakes. To others, he symbolizes the danger of unchecked power in the pulpit. One thing is certain: faith built on personality will always crumble. Faith built on truth will not.
Kenneth Copeland. He calls it God's prosperity. Critics call it something else: greed wrapped in scripture. Kenneth Copeland is the billionaire-style preacher whose empire includes an airport, multiple jets, a massive ministry compound, and one of the largest word-of-faith followings in the world. This is the story of the man who turned faith into fortune, and the controversy that never stops growing. Before the pulpit. Before the sermons, before the jets, before the empire. Kenneth Copeland wanted to be a musician. In the 1950s, he briefly broke into the Billboard charts with a single that showed promise. But fame didn't come from music, it came from ministry. After a religious conversion, he became a pilot for evangelist Oral Roberts, a job that would shape the rest of his life. Copeland wasn't just learning theology, he was learning how to combine spirituality with spectacle. He studied the Word of Faith movement, an idea that the tongue could reshape reality and that donations could unlock God's financial blessings. This belief would become the backbone of his message and the engine of a multi-million-dollar empire. Building a ministry of abundance. In 1967, Copeland and his wife Gloria founded Kenneth Copeland Ministries. What began as small tent meetings soon transformed into giant revival events broadcast across the world. The message was simple: believe boldly, speak boldly, give boldly. Copeland preached that God wanted believers wealthy, healthy, and victorious in every part of life. To supporters, this was empowering. To critics, it was a spiritual sales pitch. As offerings increased, so did the lifestyle. Copeland purchased properties, vehicles, and eventually, an airstrip. The airplane controversy. If one thing has defined Copeland's public controversies, it's the jets. Multiple jets. His ministry acquired aircraft worth millions, including a Gulfstream 5, nicknamed the ministry's dream machine. Copeland defended them fiercely. He insisted commercial flights were spiritually distracting, even calling airline passengers a tube full of demons in a now infamous interview. For many, that moment exposed everything troubling about his ministry, the disconnect between a preacher's luxury and the struggles of the people funding it. But Copeland didn't backtrack. He doubled down, arguing private jets were essential for spreading the gospel, and the donations kept coming. Investigations and the Senate inquiry. By 2007, Copeland's empire had grown so large that the U.S. Senate launched an inquiry into the finances of several major televangelists, including him. Investigators questioned whether ministry money was being used for personal extravagance, luxury homes, multiple airplanes, expensive cars, lavish travel, enormous salaries. Copeland refused to fully cooperate with investigators. No criminal charges resulted, but the inquiry highlighted one major issue. Most televangelist ministries, including Copeland's, operate with almost zero financial transparency. To critics, that made Copeland untouchable. To supporters, it was government persecution. The healing claims. Alongside prosperity teaching, Copeland became known for healing declarations, dramatic moments where he claimed illness, addiction, and even death could be defeated through faith. Crowds fainted. People sobbed. Supporters reported miracles. But skeptics asked a hard question. Why did Copeland himself rely on doctors and medication while telling followers they were healed? The tension grew during public tragedies. When crises hit, Copeland often declared he could command storms, rebuke disease, or destroy sickness. These statements weren't just controversial. They bordered on dangerous. COVID-19 and the Wind of God. In 2020, Copeland made headlines again. As COVID-19 spread across the world, Copeland declared on live TV that he was obliterating the virus, recreation style, I blow the wind of God on you. He exhaled sharply into the camera. He repeated the phrase. He shouted that COVID-19 was dead. The clip went viral, not as a spiritual moment, but as a meme. As millions struggled to pay medical bills, lose jobs, and survive the pandemic. Copeland continued fundraising. For critics, it was the clearest example yet of how prosperity theology could harm vulnerable people. The compound and the culture. Copeland's ministry headquarters in Texas is more than a building. It's a compound, complete with its own church, TV studio, airport, warehouses, and training facilities. Many followers move near it, treating it like spiritual ground zero. To them, Copeland is a father figure in faith, a man blessed by God and worthy of honor. But outsiders see something different. A closed environment centered almost entirely on one man's interpretation of success and spirituality. When money and devotion mix at this scale, accountability becomes almost impossible. The legacy of Kenneth Copeland. Kenneth Copeland is more than a preacher. He's a symbol. To supporters, he represents faith without limits. To critics, he represents greed without shame. Whether you see him as a visionary or a warning sign, one thing is undeniable. He changed modern Christianity. And the bill for that transformation has been paid by millions of believers who hoped for miracles. Benny Hinn. Few religious figures have ever commanded an audience like Benny Hinn, a man in a white suit waving his hand, in entire sections of a stadium falling backward in unison. Millions believed it was the power of God. Critics believed it was something else entirely. A billion-dollar illusion. The making of a global preacher. To understand Benny Hinn, you have to understand where he came from. Born in Israel, raised in the Greek Orthodox tradition, and later moved to Canada, Hinn's life was a blend of cultures and religions. As a teenager, he struggled socially. Quiet, awkward, unsure of his identity. Then he attended a miracle crusade and declared that he had been spiritually transformed. From that moment on, he wanted to become the man on the stage, the center of supernatural energy. He began preaching in the 1970s and quickly found his unique formula, the white suit and the brand of power. For Benny Hinn, presentation was everything. The flowing white suit, the dramatic music, the trembling voices, and then the touch. Hinn would lay hands on people, wave his jacket, or simply extend his arms, and dozens would collapse backward in what he called being slain in the spirit. Crowds erupted. Crutches were raised. Wheelchairs emptied. Television cameras captured every moment, broadcasting them to millions of homes worldwide. To believers, it wasn't theater. It was holy power. But skeptics couldn't ignore the pattern. Thousands healed on stage. Yet almost no verified medical documentation afterward. Follow the money. By the 1980s and 90s, Benny Hinn Ministries had become a global financial force. Massive crusades, primetime broadcasts, donation pleas woven into every program. Investigations later revealed staggering spending, private flights, 5-star hotels, custom-designed suits, multi-million-dollar homes, and a travel lifestyle fit for royalty. Hinn justified it all by saying he needed excellence for God. But many questioned why excellence looked so much like luxury, and more importantly, why the people funding it were often the sick, the poor, and the desperate. The healing miracles under the microscope. Journalists, medical experts, and former staff members began speaking up. Some said the miracles were exaggerated. Some said the healed rarely stayed healed. Others claimed stage managers selected who appeared on camera, choosing people with conditions that looked dramatic but weren't medically severe. A Los Angeles Times investigation found no independently verified evidence of terminal illnesses cured by Hinn's ministry. Not one. Even more troubling, former insiders alleged pressure to present healings more dramatically on camera. Because drama meant donations. The Senate investigation. In 2007, the U.S. Senate launched a massive probe into 6 major televangelists, including Benny Hinn. They asked, how was ministry money being spent? Were donations used for personal luxury? Did financial records match IRS guidelines? Hinn cooperated more than some others, but the investigation revealed a pattern of lavish spending, no financial transparency, and almost no accountability to donors. No criminal charges were filed, but the message was clear. Benny Hinn's ministry operated like a corporation, without the regulations of one. Family fractures and public fallout. In 2010, Hinn's wife, Suzanne, filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Around the same time, photos surfaced of Hinn traveling with another female televangelist, triggering waves of rumors and scandal. His ministry insisted the relationship was innocent, but the damage was done. For years, Hinn preached holiness and purity, and now faced accusations of failing his own standards. The divorce was later reversed, and the couple reconciled. But the controversies never fully faded. The prosperity gospel reversal. In 2019, Benny Hinn shocked the religious world. He announced, in a rare moment of public remorse, that he no longer supported the extreme version of the prosperity gospel. He said the practice of promising financial miracles for donations was an offense to God. The statement made headlines everywhere. But critics wondered, was it genuine repentance, or simply a rebranding effort after years of scrutiny? Despite his words, reports show his ministry still relies heavily on financial appeals. The shift, while dramatic, remains complicated. The legacy of Benny Hinn. To many, Benny Hinn brought comfort, inspiration, and the dream of divine healing. To others, he represents the commercialization of hope. A preacher who built unimaginable wealth on the backs of the suffering. His legacy is divided, his influence undeniable. And his story a warning about the thin line between faith and performance. Ted Haggard. He was the pastor who met with presidents, the leader of millions, a national voice on morality. Until the truth came knocking, and the entire facade shattered overnight. Ted Haggard's downfall wasn't just a scandal, it was a political earthquake, from small town to mega church. Ted Haggard didn't start in power. In 1984, he and his wife Gail launched a tiny prayer group in their basement in Colorado Springs. From the start, his energy was magnetic, funny, passionate, relatable. People flocked to hear him. Within a decade, New Life Church grew from a handful of people to thousands, then tens of thousands. By the early 2000s, New Life wasn't just a church. It was a symbol of modern evangelical influence, complete with a 7,500-seat sanctuary and a sprawling campus. Haggard wasn't simply a pastor anymore. He was becoming something much bigger. The most powerful evangelical in America. In 2003, Ted Haggard reached the height of his influence. He was elected president of the National Association of Evangelicals, representing 30 million American Christians. Suddenly, he had the ear of the White House. Presidents invited him for private meetings. Politicians sought his counsel. News networks treated him like the moral pulse of the nation. Haggard championed traditional family values, spoke fiercely against same-sex relationships, and positioned himself as a guardian of American morality. He wasn't just leading a church, he was shaping national policy. But while he stood in front of cameras preaching purity, behind the scenes, he was hiding a life that contradicted everything he claimed to stand for. The accusation that unraveled everything. In November 2006, a man named Mike Jones stepped forward. A Denver-based male escort, Jones claimed he had a 3-year relationship with Ted Haggard, involving paid sexual encounters and methamphetamine. It was the kind of allegation that could vaporize a public career instantly, and it did. Haggard denied everything at first. He said he didn't know the man. He said the accusations were political attacks. But then, a voicemail. A voice that sounded exactly like Haggard, asking for drugs. The evidence didn't stop there. Money transfers, phone calls, statements, patterns. The image Haggard built for decades was collapsing under its own weight. The resignation and public humiliation. When the truth became undeniable, Ted Haggard resigned, both from New Life Church and from the leadership of the National Association of Evangelicals. For his congregation, it was like an earthquake. Families cried. Volunteers felt betrayed. Members who had dedicated years to the church suddenly questioned everything. New Life Church issued a statement saying Haggard was guilty of sexual immorality. He was removed from his role, barred from ministry leadership, and sent into a restoration program. A pastor who preached holiness, now being restored by the very leaders he once outranked. The hypocrisy wasn't just shocking, it was devastating. The restoration that didn't last. Haggard entered months of counseling and church-imposed rehabilitation. Official reports said he was making progress. Some claimed he had been completely restored. But behind the scenes, things weren't so perfect. Haggard later admitted he struggled for decades with desires he felt he could never confess in the evangelical world. He said he lived in fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing everything. Fear of disappointing millions. And so, the double life continued until it finally exploded. The restoration program eventually ended, and Haggard quietly disappeared from public view. But not for long. New life, new church, same questions. In 2010, Ted Haggard returned to Colorado Springs and launched a brand new congregation, St. James Church. Some welcomed his comeback, calling it redemption. Others saw it as a slap in the face to the people he betrayed. Membership never reached former heights, but the small community that formed around him believed in second chances. Still, controversy followed. Several new allegations emerged throughout the years, from inappropriate behavior to blurred boundaries with young men in the church. None resulted in criminal convictions, but they kept Ted Haggard under a cloud of suspicion. For many, the question remained, had he truly changed, or simply adjusted the mask? The legacy of a fallen leader. Ted Haggard's legacy is one of extremes. A charismatic leader who inspired millions, and a man hiding a private life that unraveled his public empire. He symbolized the rising power of American evangelicalism, and his downfall symbolized its vulnerabilities. Secrecy, shame, image over authenticity, power without accountability. Haggard once stood beside presidents. Now, he leads a humble congregation far from the spotlight he once commanded. Results. The story of Ted Haggard is a reminder that even the most polished public personas can hide the deepest contradictions. Faith built on image can crumble overnight. Faith built on truth needs a mask. Jimmy Swaggart. He was the fiery preacher with millions of followers, a man whose music topped gospel charts and whose sermons echoed across the world. Jimmy Swaggart wasn't just a pastor. He was a global Christian superstar. But behind the pulpit, he was living a double life that he could hide for only so long. The rise of a religious icon. Jimmy Swaggart was born in Faraday, Louisiana, a small town with a big musical family. His cousins? Jerry Lee Lewis, the rock and roll legend. Mickey Gilley, the country star. While they chased fame through music, Swaggart took a different route. The church. He traveled to tiny rural congregations, preaching in the evenings and singing in the mornings. His voice, raw, emotional, desperate, pulled people in. In the 1960s, Swaggart's sermons aired on local radio. By the 70s, he had launched a national television ministry. By the 80s, he was everywhere. Millions tuned into his show. Stadiums filled when he preached. His gospel albums sold in the millions. Jimmy Swaggart became one of the most influential Christian figures in America. But influence attracts scrutiny. A man of fire and fury. Swaggart wasn't a quiet preacher. He was aggressive, emotional, explosive. He condemned sin with thunderous passion, especially sexual sin. His sermons attacked pornography, adultery, prostitution, and other preachers he believed were corrupt. He positioned himself as the moral backbone of American Christianity, a man who lived above temptation. His audience believed him, his co-workers trusted him, and his ministry grew richer every year, pulling in up to $150 million annually at its peak. But the man warning others about sin was quietly drowning in his own. The exposure. In 1988, the truth burst into the headlines. Investigators in Louisiana, acting on reports from another preacher Swaggart had publicly criticized, caught him visiting a sex worker. Details emerged. Photographs emerged. Testimony emerged. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. While Swaggart condemned others for immorality, he had been living his own secret life for years. The news stunned the church world. People who had cried with him during sermons now cried for an entirely different reason. The most infamous televangelist confession. On February 21st, 1988, Jimmy Swaggart stepped onto the stage at Family Worship Center. His hands shook. His voice cracked. Millions watched live. And then, he delivered the now famous line, through tears, "I have sinned." Not once, not quietly, but loudly, dramatically, publicly. The moment became one of the most replayed clips in religious TV history. Some felt sympathy. Others felt manipulated. Was it repentance? Or an emotional performance designed to save a collapsing empire? Opinions split instantly, but the aftermath was brutal. The punishment and power struggle. The Assemblies of God, the denomination Swaggart belonged to, took action. They removed his ministerial credentials for 1 year. They demanded counseling and restoration. Swaggart refused the full disciplinary process. He wanted back on TV quickly. As a result, the Assemblies of God stripped him of his ministerial license permanently. For many, this was the spiritual equivalent of being exiled. But Swaggart didn't give up. He simply kept preaching, without their approval. The second scandal that ruined everything. Just when people started to move on, 1991 delivered the final blow. Swaggart was pulled over by police in California, in the company of yet another sex worker. When questioned, he reportedly told the officer, "The Lord told me it's none of your business." The statement spread nationwide. It became a punchline, and his credibility evaporated. The first scandal cracked his empire. The second shattered it, rebuilding from ashes. After losing millions of followers and nearly all mainstream influence, Jimmy Swaggart quietly rebuilt a smaller ministry. He created Sun Life Broadcasting Network, a TV channel that still runs today. His audience? Loyal, older, and far smaller than before. His wife Frances remained by his side. His son Donnie and grandson Gabriel joined him on stage. For some, it's a story of redemption. For others, it's proof that certain followers will never abandon a charismatic preacher, no matter what he does. Swaggart still preaches every week, but he will never escape the scandals that rewrote his legacy. The man who warned against sin while living in it. Jimmy Swaggart was one of the most influential evangelists of the 20th century, a man who once shaped global Christianity. But he will always be remembered for what followed: the tears, the scandals, and the hypocrisy that destroyed an empire. His story is a reminder. When the preacher becomes the brand, the downfall becomes inevitable. Creflo Dollar. He preached that faith can unlock wealth. He taught that blessings flow from generosity. And he lived in a way that proved he believed every word, or exploited it. Creflo Dollar built one of the biggest prosperity churches in America, but at the center of it all was a lifestyle that sparked outrage around the world. From a small group to a global church. Creflo Dollar didn't begin in a grand sanctuary. He began in a school cafeteria. In 1986, he gathered just 8 people and preached a message he later called the Word of Faith. A message centered on believing big and sowing financially to receive divine rewards. The group exploded in size. Within a few years, Dollar founded World Changers Church International in College Park, Georgia. Soon, thousands attended each week. The sanctuary grew into the World Dome, a massive building with over 8,000 seats and millions of dollars in construction costs. Dollar wasn't just a pastor anymore. He was an emerging force in Christian television, and he was just getting started. The prosperity message. At the center of Dollar's teaching was a promise. If you give generously to God, God will bless you financially in return. He used phrases like sow a seed, expect abundance, and supernatural increase. To struggling families, it sounded like hope. To skeptics, it sounded like spiritual gambling. Dollar taught that God wants believers wealthy. Poverty is a curse. Generosity guarantees return. And giving to the church is giving directly to God. But while many followers lived paycheck to paycheck, Dollar's life told a different story. The luxury lifestyle. Reports revealed that Dollar owned a multi-million-dollar Atlanta mansion, a Manhattan property in one of the most expensive neighborhoods, expensive cars, a private jet, and multiple ministry-owned assets. To supporters, this was proof that the message worked. To critics, it was evidence of a preacher living off the sacrifices of his poorest followers. Dollar defended the lifestyle. He insisted he was blessed because he practiced what he preached. But the question remained, were the blessings divine or the result of massive donations? The U.S. Senate investigation. In 2007, something unprecedented happened. The U.S. Senate launched an investigation into 6 major televangelists, including Creflo Dollar. They wanted to know how much money was coming in. How was it being used? Were ministries operating like tax-free businesses? Dollar refused to fully cooperate, citing religious freedom. The investigation didn't result in criminal charges, but it did highlight a problem. Religious nonprofits have huge financial power and almost zero oversight. Dollar's ministry continued operating as usual, but controversy kept following him. The $65 million jet. In 2015, Creflo Dollar made global headlines, and not the kind he wanted. His ministry launched a campaign asking followers to donate toward a $65 million Gulfstream G650 jet. The pitch? Dollar needed the jet to efficiently preach worldwide. The internet exploded. News outlets mocked it. Social media tore it apart. Some members defended him passionately. Others felt betrayed. The backlash was so intense that the ministry quietly removed the fundraising campaign, but the damage to his public image was irreversible. The story went international and became one of the most infamous prosperity gospel controversies in years. Personal controversies. In 2012, Dollar faced another scandal, this time involving his family. He was arrested after an incident with his teenage daughter. Police reports described a physical altercation. Dollar denied wrongdoing, and the charges were later dropped. Still, the incident resurfaced questions about his character, the pressure of his image, and how much of his life was controlled by the persona he built on stage. The message in the modern era. Despite the controversies, Dollar's ministry continues to attract supporters. He still preaches abundance. He still insists generosity unlocks blessing. He still lives a lifestyle most Christians could never dream of. But in recent years, the prosperity message has lost some of its cultural firepower. Younger generations question it. The internet scrutinizes it. And the scandals make it harder to ignore the wealth gap between preacher and believer. Still, Dollar remains one of the world's most recognizable prosperity voices, and he shows no signs of slowing down. The cost of believing. Creflo Dollar's story isn't just about luxury or scandal. It's about the power of belief and the price people will pay for hope. To some, he is proof that faith works. To others, he is the face of a system that exploits the vulnerable. But one thing is certain: when blessings are for sale, someone always pays. Eddie Long. He was a spiritual giant, a community leader, a preacher with tens of thousands of followers and political influence. But behind the powerful sermons and designer suits, Eddie Long carried secrets that would destroy his legacy and shake an entire congregation to its core. Humble beginnings to megachurch royalty. Eddie Long was born in North Carolina, raised by hardworking parents, and educated at North Carolina Central University. His early ministry work was unremarkable. Small churches, small congregations, modest influence. But he had something that couldn't be taught: charisma. When Long took over New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Georgia in 1987, everything changed. The church had just 300 members. Within a decade, it had over 25,000. New Birth transformed into one of the most powerful African American megachurches in the country, complete with massive facilities, political partnerships, and nationwide broadcasts. Eddie Long wasn't just a pastor, he was a celebrity. The prosperity and power message. Long preached a bold message: God wants his people to prosper. He talked about wealth, success, discipline, and spiritual authority. To many, he was a father figure. especially to young black men searching for direction and community. He created mentorship programs, leadership camps, youth ministries. He presented himself as a warrior for moral values and traditional family structures. But that public image was about to collide with a reality no one could have imagined. The first whispers. In 2010, everything changed. 4 young men filed lawsuits against Eddie Long, accusing him of using his spiritual authority to manipulate them into sexual relationships. They described private trips, expensive gifts, elaborate mentoring, hotel encounters, and emotional grooming. These weren't random accusations. The young men were part of Long's inner mentorship group, a program meant to guide young black men into adulthood. The allegations sent shockwaves through the church world. The pastor who condemned homosexuality from the pulpit was now accused of exploiting young men in secret. The public denial. A few days after the lawsuits hit the news, Eddie Long addressed his congregation. The sanctuary overflowed. People cried. Others prayed. Some stared in disbelief. Long walked on stage wearing a simple suit, carrying his Bible, and said, "I am not the man being portrayed in the media." He didn't explicitly deny the relationships, but insisted he never coerced anyone. He said he would fight the accusations. He asked his flock to trust him, and many did. Some members hugged him, some cheered. Some claimed the allegations were attacks on a black leader with power, but others walked away forever. The congregation split almost overnight. The settlement that spoke louder than words. The lawsuits never went to trial. In 2011, Eddie Long and the 4 young men reached confidential settlements, estimated in the millions. Legally, a settlement is not an admission of guilt, but for critics, it was confirmation of everything alleged, and for supporters, it raised new, uncomfortable questions. If he was innocent, why settle? If he was guilty, why not face justice? The scandal left New Birth devastated. Attendance dropped dramatically. Staff members resigned. The church finances took a massive hit. The empire Eddie Long built for over 2 decades was collapsing. The health mystery. In 2016, Eddie Long reappeared in public looking dramatically thinner, not just slimmer, unrecognizable. He claimed to be on a vegan diet, but church members knew something was wrong. Rumors spread instantly. Cancer, immune disorders, stress-related illness, or complications tied to the scandal. Long kept silent. He continued preaching, though visibly weakening over the months. On January 15, 2017, Eddie Long died at age 63. The cause? Official reports say cancer, but the emotional and spiritual scars on his congregation would last much longer. What Eddie Long left behind. Eddie Long left behind a divided legacy. Supporters remember him as a powerful voice, a builder of community, a mentor to thousands, and a champion of black empowerment. Critics see him as a man who hid behind scripture to exploit the vulnerable, a preacher who lived in luxury while his followers struggled, a hypocrite who preached purity while living in contradiction. The truth sits somewhere between tragedy and betrayal. New Birth still exists today, but it will never be what it was under Long. His influence was undeniable. So was his downfall, a warning written in fire. Eddie Long's story proves that charisma can build a kingdom, and misconduct can burn it to the ground. Faith leaders hold immense power. But when that power goes unchecked, devastation is inevitable. Joel Osteen. He's one of the most recognizable pastors in the world. A preacher whose smile is as iconic as his sermons. A man who transformed a basketball arena into the largest church in America. Joel Osteen built an empire on positivity. But behind the polished image lies controversy, criticism, and moments that nearly shattered his public reputation. The Reluctant Preacher. Joel Osteen wasn't supposed to be a preacher. Born in 1963 in Houston, Texas, Joel grew up watching his father, John Osteen, build Lakewood Church from a small congregation into a thriving ministry. But Joel didn't want the spotlight. He worked behind the scenes, running cameras, producing sermons, handling media. He stayed quiet, unseen, content with a life off stage. Then, in 1999, everything changed. His father died suddenly, and Joel, who had preached only once before, stepped onto the pulpit. His soft-spoken, encouraging style was the opposite of traditional fire and brimstone preaching. But it worked. People loved it. Within a year, he became the senior pastor, and the growth was explosive. Building the biggest church in America. Joel Osteen had a vision: bring faith into a modern arena. In 2005, Lakewood Church moved into the former Compaq Center, a sports arena once home to the Houston Rockets. The transformation cost nearly $100 million. The result? A 16,000-seat worship center. Complete with giant screens, top-tier lighting, professional musicians, and a production quality rivaling concerts. Lakewood became the largest weekly gathering of any church in the United States, and Joel became the smiling face of American Christianity. His books hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. His sermons reached millions across 100+ countries, and his positivity-only message made him a spiritual celebrity. But with that fame came questions, and critics were waiting. The power of positive preaching. Osteen's teaching was different. No warnings about hell, no shouting about sin, no guilt, no fear, no fire. Instead, he preached self-improvement, confidence, personal growth, financial blessing, and living your best life now. For millions weary of traditional preaching, it was refreshing, uplifting, hopeful. But many pastors accused him of turning Christianity into a motivational seminar. They said he was softening biblical doctrine. Others accused him of preaching the prosperity gospel, linking faith to success and wealth. The criticism grew louder every year, and then real controversy struck. Hurricane Harvey and the closed doors. In August 2017, Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston. Thousands lost their homes. Families slept in shelters. People searched for safety anywhere they could find it. And then photos surfaced online. Lakewood Church's giant doors closed. People accused Joel Osteen of refusing to shelter victims. Social media exploded with outrage. News outlets pounced on the story. Osteen responded, saying the building was unsafe due to flooding, and that they planned to open as soon as city shelters filled. But the damage to his reputation was instant. For many critics, it confirmed a belief they'd held for years. Joel Osteen's church was built more for comfort than compassion. Days later, Lakewood did open its doors, but the scandal never fully disappeared. The millions, the mansion, and the money questions. Joel Osteen insists he takes no salary from Lakewood Church. And that's true. But he earns millions from book deals, international speaking tours, and branding. His Houston home is reportedly worth over $10 million. This raised the question, how wealthy should a pastor be? Supporters say he earned it legitimately through books. Critics say the pastor of America's largest church shouldn't live a celebrity lifestyle. And then another controversy hit. The $4.4 million pandemic loan. During the COVID-19 pandemic, news broke that Lakewood Church received $4.4 million in Paycheck Protection Program loans. Public outrage erupted. How can a megachurch led by a multimillionaire accept government money? Lakewood later repaid the entire amount, but the incident fueled skepticism about church finances, wealth, taxes, and transparency. And once again, Osteen's smiling image became a lightning rod. The wrestle with image versus impact. Through it all, Joel Osteen continued preaching the same message: hope, optimism, overcoming adversity, living with purpose. He avoided political arguments. He avoided doctrinal battles. He stayed uplifting, positive, and controversy-free, at least from the pulpit. But public opinion is divided. To supporters, he is a source of light in dark times, a man who encourages millions with kindness instead of fear. To critics, he is a polished brand, a motivational speaker packaged as a pastor, selling positivity instead of depth. The world's smiling pastor. Joel Osteen's legacy is still being written. He remains one of the most famous preachers on earth, a man whose influence stretches far beyond Sunday mornings. But his story raises a bigger question. When faith becomes a global brand, can it still stay authentic? Whether you see him as inspiring or superficial, Joel Osteen changed the landscape of American Christianity. And he did it with a smile. Apollo Quiboloy. He calls himself the appointed Son of God. He commands a multi-million member following. He owns private jets, media networks, sprawling compounds, and a global influence that stretches far beyond religion. But behind the divine claims lies a trail of allegations. From human trafficking to abuse to financial manipulation, and a criminal indictment that placed him on the FBI's most wanted list. The rise of a self-proclaimed messiah. Apollo Quiboloy was born in 1950 in the southern Philippines, the youngest of 9 children in a poor, rural family. His rise was unlikely. In 1985, he founded the Kingdom of Jesus Christ in Davao City. What started as a small prayer group soon grew into a massive religious movement. But unlike traditional pastors, Quiboloy made a bold declaration. He was God's appointed son, not a prophet, not a messenger, but the living representative of God on earth. For millions of Filipinos searching for purpose, hope, and identity, the message was magnetic. Followers donated homes, land, money, even their labor. Within years, Quiboloy's church expanded across the Philippines, Japan, the US, Canada, and beyond. The mega empire. As membership grew, so did the empire. Quiboloy's ministry amassed private aircraft, luxury cars, mansions, a sprawling Davao compound, an international broadcasting network, schools and universities, business partnerships, political alliances. His lifestyle matched that of a billionaire CEO, not a pastor. He often preached surrounded by security teams, media crews, and choreographed worship performers. To his followers, This opulence symbolized divine blessing. To critics, it looked like a cult leader building a kingdom on devotion, fear, and control. And control would become a central theme in the allegations that followed. The dark side of discipline. Former members describe Quiboloy's church as highly authoritarian. They claim daily routines were strictly controlled, personal relationships were monitored, finances were surrendered, dissent was punished, loyalty was absolute. Some said they were pressured to cut off family members. Others reported emotional manipulation, threats, and spiritual penalties. Quiboloy denied all claims, calling them attacks from rebellious former followers. But the accusations weren't just internal. They soon crossed international borders. The U.S. federal investigation. In 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice unveiled a sweeping indictment. Quiboloy and several associates were charged with sex trafficking of minors, sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, bulk cash smuggling, visa fraud, forced labor, money laundering. Federal prosecutors allege that young women, known as pastorals, were groomed, isolated, and transported internationally under false pretenses. Some reports describe them as spiritual workers, forced into acts they believed were necessary for salvation. The indictment portrayed a system of exploitation hidden behind divine authority. Quiboloy denied everything, claiming persecution, political targeting, and spiritual warfare. But the charges were severe, and they carried potential life sentences. The FBI Most Wanted List. In 2022, the FBI placed Apollo Quiboloy on its Most Wanted list. A global alert went out. The U.S. government accused him of orchestrating a criminal enterprise disguised as a church. His associates were arrested. His properties were raided. His financial networks were scrutinized. But Quiboloy himself, he stayed in the Philippines, largely protected by political allies. One of those allies was former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, a longtime friend from Davao City. This relationship sparked controversy over whether Quiboloy was shielded from arrest. To his followers, his ability to evade U.S. capture was proof of divine protection. To critics, it was proof of corruption. The devoted and the deceived. Despite the global scandals, millions still follow Apollo Quiboloy. Devotees call him Father, Pastor, or even God's chosen king on earth. They believe he performs miracles. He predicts global events. He controls weather through divine authority. And he alone represents God's kingdom in the last days. Some claim he cured illnesses. Others claim he saved them from poverty or violence. But ex-members say the opposite: financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, coerced labor, spiritual fear, and isolation from family. The divide is extreme. The passion on both sides is undeniable. And the world watches, torn between belief and horror. The future of the appointed son. As of today, Apollo Quiboloy remains free in the Philippines. The U.S. government continues to pursue his extradition. His church continues to broadcast worldwide. His followers continue to multiply. His critics continue to fight for justice. The question that hangs in the air is this: will he be remembered as a spiritual leader, or as the architect of one of the most manipulative religious empires in modern history? Only time and the courts will decide. Faith, fear, and control. Apollo. Quiboloy's story is the ultimate warning. When one man claims absolute divine authority, the consequences can echo across nations. Faith can uplift, but when weaponized, it can destroy. We've seen empires rise and collapse under the weight of their own secrets. We've seen men worshipped like saints, only to fall like anyone else when truth finally surfaced. But the real tragedy isn't the scandals themselves. It's the people left behind. The believers who gave their trust, their money, their hope, and sometimes their entire lives to leaders who were never worthy of that devotion. Faith can lift nations, but when it's placed in the wrong hands, it can destroy lives. These 10 pastors remind us of one sobering truth. Charisma is not character. Popularity is not purity, and a microphone is a dangerous weapon when held by someone who believes they can do no wrong. So the real question isn't how these men fell. The real question is, why did so many follow them so blindly? If we learn anything from these stories, let it be question leadership, protect your faith, and never surrender your conscience to someone just because they stand on a stage. Thank you for watching. If this documentary opened your eyes, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and join us here on Winds of Thought. For more deep dives into the stories the world needs to hear, stay aware, stay critical, stay informed.